Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Dutil, and I'm here today to talk to you about becoming more familiar with the latest changes to FERPA. After completing this training module, all employees will be able to understand the most recent changes to FERPA and be able to follow all compliant policies and procedures at News Story. So what is FERPA? FERPA is an acronym that stands for the Family, Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So FERPA is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of student education records. Under this law, families, meaning parents or guardians, are granted certain rights, but those rights are transferred to students when they turn 18 years old or attend a second post-secondary institution. However, if parents claim children as dependents on their taxes, they can still retain their rights under FERPA. FERPA provides educational rights. For example, it provides the right of parents and adult-age students to inspect and receive a copy of student records. It also provides the right to deny access to others, specifically those outside the school system, with some exceptions. It provides a process to correct errors, including a hearing. It provides the right to opt out of military recruitment. It provides the right to opt out of disclosure of a student's directory information. And it provides a complaint process, which is handled by the Family Compliance Office of the U.S. Department of Education. With the filing of formal complaints, if the U.S. Department of Education finds that an educational agency or institution has violated FERPA, they will work with the educational agency or institution to bring it into compliance. However, public funds may be withheld if an educational agency or institution is unwilling or unable to come into voluntary compliance with the law. As we said before, FERPA protects the confidentiality of educational records. So what are educational records? Well, educational records are records maintained by the school that are directly related to the student. They include student grades, immunization and health records maintained by the school, disciplinary records, student progress reports, academic or physical testing results, grade point average, and attendance records. Included in the educational records are personal identifiable information. And this is really what we have to keep our eyes on. Personally identifiable information is defined to include not only direct identifiers like the student's name and social security number, but also indirect identifiers such as the student's date and place of birth and the mother's maiden name. Personal identifiable information includes other information that alone or in combination is linked or is linkable to a specific student that would allow a reasonable person in the school community who does not personally have any knowledge of the relevant circumstances to identify the student with reasonable certainty. There are exceptions to schools for sharing data. Not to complicate things, but there are a few exemptions. In the context of school safety, FERPA makes an exception to its restrictions on data sharing should knowledge of such information be necessary to protect the health or safety of students or other persons in connection with an emergency. Examples of this could include epidemic of diseases or campus shootings. Think about COVID-19 protocols and regulations that would come from the CDC. Now, we are collecting that data and we have that data. So we have to talk about the retention and the destruction of that data eventually. So FERPA does not require educational agencies and institutions to destroy educational records maintained as a part of the regular school or agency operations. Some places may actually require lengthy retention periods for student attendance and graduation records. For other student records, in order to minimize IT costs and reduce the likelihood of the disclosure of student information, schools will often elect to establish their own record retention policies, including timeframes for the eventual destruction of those records. But understand, digital records are hard to delete. Data are routinely recovered from media which have been burned, crushed, submerged in water, or impacted from great heights. When we talk about digital data, now we have to really talk about FERPA compliance in the digital age. As of September 2019, at least 10 school districts have been in the news for their own ransomware attacks, and the U.S. Department of Education reports that hundreds of educational data breaches occur annually. Ransomware is basically when computers are hacked and data is collected, but then the people demand money in return for that data. So in the digital age comes even more obstacles. Digital record keeping has replaced traditional paper files. Classroom assignments and assessments are often delivered online via laptops or tablets, and teachers use social media platforms and a lot of different websites, often free apps in the classroom. And many operational functions historically performed by schools are now outsourced remotely to contractors. This includes students' full names, date of birth, and home address, as well as other sensitive information such as health records, special education referrals, and in some cases, biometric data such as fingerprints and facial scans. So this means that we have to be mindful of third-party vendors. Schools should also be careful with these vendors, um, especially with apps and websites that offer free services. Free does not always mean great service. Those services might appear free on the surface, but the vendors could be getting paid in education records or mining the data to sell to third parties, which is another violation of FERPA. So we need to be cautious about that. And we need to be cautious about what we say to other people. Educators need to be careful about what they post on social media and be mindful of that dreadful reply all button, which we are all very familiar with. Another consequence of living in a digital age is the use of surveillance cameras in school. Most schools have cameras in them for safety and liability reasons, but we need to be mindful that under FERPA, schools still need to protect the privacy of students. Anything captured on surveillance recordings qualifies as educational records when a photo or video is directly related to a student and is maintained by the school. But surveillance recordings that are created and maintained by a school's law enforcement unit are not education records and therefore not confidential. So there is a distinction. If, however, those recordings are provided to and then maintained by the school, then they become education records that require protection under FERPA. In other words, schools need to protect recordings if they are directly related to the student. How do we determine what is related to a student? Whether a recording is directly related to a student is a context-specific determination. Some factors are whether the recording is used for disciplinary action involving specific students, whether recording depicts an activity that would reasonably result in a use of disciplinary action, shows a student violating the law, or shows a student getting injured, attacked, victimized, ill, or having a health emergency. Whether the school intends to make a specific student the focus of a recording, like for ID photos, or whether or not the content contains personally identifiable information from a school's education record. As you can see, compliance is not always easy, but compliance matters. How do we remain compliant? Well, one of the first things we can do to remain compliant is to raise awareness about FERPA. Then we can bring people to realize and confirm that FERPA applies to them. Then we can know the rights and protections and exceptions under FERPA. And then we can choose compliant vendors and choose to be compliant even ourselves. We can train all school employees just like the training you're receiving now. We can implement compliant policies and procedures. We can look to encrypt files and emails, especially in the digital age. And we can implement other prevention tools that will help us stay in compliance. So as we conclude this presentation, I want to take a moment to make sure that you are aware on how to find our actual policies. We have a specific policy, which is policy 633, that deals with FERPA. And this policy is on the internet by clicking on policies and procedures under the quick link section on the right side on the internet homepage. From there, you would click on policies and procedures, then the folder that says corporate, and then there's another folder that says 600 confidential. Here you'll find a lot of policies that talk about confidentiality and specifically the policy on FERPA. So please explore this policy and other policies in this section. At this point, we went over the most recent changes to FERPA, so feel free to email the Director of Education if you have any further FERPA-related questions. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, and all of you have a great day.